In this episode, we're going to make the idea of monitoring feel concrete and learnable, even if you are brand new to cybersecurity and brand new to how AI works in real organizations. When people hear AI, they often imagine a smart system that either works or breaks in obvious ways. But real problems tend to show up quietly and gradually, long before anyone calls it an incident. The whole point of metrics is to notice those quiet changes early, while you still have options, instead of discovering them when users are already harmed or data is already exposed. By the end, you should be able to explain what kinds of AI signals matter, why drift is not the same thing as an attack, and how misuse can look like normal activity until you learn what to measure. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A metric is simply a measured number that helps you describe what is happening over time, and monitoring is the habit of watching those numbers for changes that matter. Beginners sometimes think metrics are only for performance, like speed or uptime, but security metrics are about trust and safety. A good security metric does not need to be fancy, and it does not need to prove you are perfect. It needs to help you notice unusual patterns early and react with evidence instead of guesses. Metrics also give you a shared language, because different people can interpret the same number even if they do different jobs. When you monitor AI systems, you are watching for warning signs in the model's behavior, the data it uses, and the way people interact with it. To understand what to measure, it helps to picture an AI system as a pipeline, meaning a set of connected steps that move from input to output. An input can be a user prompt, a file, a database record, a sensor reading, or a text message, and the output can be a decision, a summary, a recommendation, or an action taken in another system. Between the input and the output, the system often performs pre-processing, uses a model to compute results, and then formats or acts on the result. Security risk can enter at any point in that pipeline, which means early signals can also appear at many points. The trick is not to monitor everything, but to choose metrics that reveal problems in each major layer: input behavior, model behavior, output behavior, and downstream impact. Misuse is when someone uses the AI system in a way that violates rules, causes harm, or tries to make it do something it should not do. Some misuse is intentional, like an attacker trying to extract sensitive data or trying to bypass controls, and some misuse is accidental, like a well-meaning user pasting private data into a tool that should not receive it. Misuse can also come from insiders who have legitimate access but are acting outside their job needs, which is why security teams care about behavior patterns, not just identities. The key beginner insight is that misuse does not always look like a spike in obvious errors. It can look like normal usage with a subtle twist. That is why metrics focus on changes from typical patterns, such as unusual volume, unusual content, unusual destinations, or unusual timing. Drift is different, and it deserves its own clear definition because many people confuse drift with attacks. Model drift is when the AI model's performance changes over time because the world changes, the data changes, or the system is used in new ways. Data drift is when the inputs the model receives start to look different than what it was trained or tuned to expect, even if the model itself has not changed. Concept drift is when the meaning of the task changes, like what counts as fraud, what counts as spam, or what counts as a safe answer, and the old patterns no longer apply. Drift is often not malicious, but it can create security problems because it can make the AI system unreliable, easier to manipulate, or likely to leak information in unexpected ways. Monitoring drift helps you catch quality issues early, and it also helps you detect when an attacker is deliberately trying to push the system into bad behavior by changing inputs over time. Early incident signals are the small clues that an AI system is moving toward a security event, even if you cannot prove it yet. Think of them as smoke, not fire, and the goal is to respond before the fire spreads. An early signal might be a gradual rise in blocked prompts, a new pattern of repeated probing questions, a sudden increase in outputs that mention internal details, or a shift in the kinds of data being requested. It could also be changes in the environment around the AI system, like new integrations, new user groups, or new data sources, because those changes increase risk. The best early signals are those that connect to a plausible story of harm, such as data exposure, unsafe actions, or trust breakdown, rather than signals that only indicate something is different. When you choose metrics, you want them to tell you which story might be starting. A practical way to organize AI security metrics is to group them into three buckets: usage, safety, and quality. Usage metrics tell you how the system is being accessed, by whom, how often, from where, and through which interfaces, because unusual access patterns often come before incidents. Safety metrics tell you how often the system encounters content or requests that violate rules, and how well the system refuses, redirects, or flags risky requests. Quality metrics tell you whether outputs remain accurate and consistent enough to be trusted, because poor quality can turn into security incidents when decisions are wrong or when users lose trust and start working around controls. Each bucket matters, and a healthy monitoring approach uses all three. If you only watch usage, you may miss a slow drift in behavior. And if you only watch quality, you may miss a quiet misuse campaign that stays within normal performance ranges. For usage monitoring, you start with baselines, which are normal ranges you can compare against. A baseline can be as simple as typical daily request volume, typical peak hours, and typical geographic or network locations of users. You also want to understand the normal mix of features, like how often users upload documents, how often they request summaries, or how often they call the AI system from automated processes. Early misuse sometimes shows up as unusually high request rates from a single account, unusually repetitive prompts that look like probing, or a strange pattern of access outside normal hours. Another subtle usage signal is a sudden increase in new accounts using the tool, or a sudden increase in privilege changes related to the AI system, because attackers often try to expand access quietly. When you set up usage metrics, the goal is to answer the question, does this look like the same population using the system in the same way as last week? For safety monitoring, you want metrics that describe the boundary between allowed and disallowed behavior. Many AI systems have some form of filtering or policy enforcement, whether it is content filtering, prompt restrictions, refusal rules, or checks for sensitive data. A basic safety metric could be the count of blocked requests per day, but the more useful metric is the ratio of blocked requests to total requests, because that adjusts for overall growth. You also want to measure categories of blocked behavior, like attempts to request private data, attempts to generate harmful content, or attempts to bypass safety rules, because different categories have different risk meanings. Another key signal is repeated near misses, where a user tries many variations of a risky request, because that can indicate deliberate probing. Monitoring the model's refusal and escalation behavior is also important, because if refusals suddenly drop while risky requests rise, that is a warning sign that controls are failing. For quality monitoring, you are not trying to grade the model like a school test, and you are not trying to prove it is always correct. You are trying to notice when it starts behaving differently in a way that increases risk, such as producing more hallucinations, giving less consistent answers, or making more unsafe suggestions. A simple quality metric could be the rate of user corrections or negative feedback, but you can also track how often the system's outputs trigger internal review, how often outputs must be manually overridden, or how often the system fails to follow policy rules. Drift can show up as a slow change in output tone, a change in how often it cites sources when it should not, or a change in how frequently it makes confident claims without support. Another quality-related security signal is when the model begins to reveal internal hints about how it works, like system instructions or hidden context, because that can be exploited. By tracking quality metrics, you can spot the early stages of drift and address it before it harms users. A common beginner misconception is that monitoring only works if you know exactly what attack is coming. In reality, monitoring is more like noticing that the weather is changing by watching temperature, wind, and pressure, even if you cannot predict the exact storm. You do not need a perfect list of misuse methods to detect early signals, because many harmful behaviors share patterns like repetition, escalation, and boundary testing. Another misconception is that drift is harmless because it is not an attacker, But drift can make the system easier to manipulate and can degrade trust in a way that pushes people into unsafe workarounds. There is also a misconception that more metrics is always better, when too many metrics can drown you in noise and make you miss what matters. The practical goal is a small set of metrics that you understand well, that connect to clear risks, and that you can actually respond to. To make this feel real, imagine an AI assistant used by students to get help with assignments, and it is connected to a database of course materials. If someone starts asking repeated questions that are slightly reworded each time, trying to get the assistant to reveal private answer keys, a simple metric like repeated similar prompts from a single user becomes valuable. If the assistant begins to give answers that are increasingly off-topic or overly confident, quality metrics like increased correction rates or increased review flags might catch it, even if nothing is blocked. If the assistant suddenly receives more uploads that contain personal student records, safety metrics around sensitive data detection could warn that users are misusing it, even if they are not malicious. In each case, the early signal is not the final proof of harm, but it tells you where to look and what risk story might be starting. That is what good monitoring gives you: direction, not certainty. When an early signal appears, the next step is not panic, and it is not ignoring it as a false alarm. The next step is triage, which means asking what changed, what could go wrong, and what evidence can confirm or rule out a problem. For AI systems, evidence often includes the pattern of requests, the pattern of outputs, the identity and context of the users, and the timing relative to system changes. A useful monitoring mindset is to treat every metric spike as a question, not an answer, and to follow that question with a small set of checks. If the spike isn't blocked prompts, you might ask whether a new user group started using the tool, whether a new policy rule was introduced, or whether someone is probing for weaknesses. If the spike is in errors or quality issues, you might ask whether the input data changed, whether the model version changed, or whether a new integration created strange inputs. Another important beginner concept is that metrics only matter if you can interpret them, and interpretation depends on context. A rise in usage might be good if the tool is being adopted, or it might be risky if the rise comes from a single account at 2 a.m. every night. A decrease in blocked prompts might be good if users learn the rules, or it might be bad if the filter is failing. Even a stable metric can hide a problem if attackers are slowly ramping up to avoid detection, which is why trends over time matter more than a single number. This is also why you want to monitor both absolute counts and ratios, because a ratio can reveal changes that counts hide. When you explain monitoring to a beginner, it helps to emphasize that metrics are clues that must be read in the story of the system, not independent facts. As we wrap up, the big idea is that AI monitoring is about maintaining trust by noticing small changes before they become big failures. Metrics help you spot misuse that hides inside normal usage, drift that quietly changes system behavior, and early incident signals that warn you something is starting to go wrong. The most useful approach is to watch a balanced set of usage, safety, and quality metrics, establish baselines, and respond to changes with calm triage and evidence gathering. When you learn to separate malicious misuse from non-malicious drift, you avoid both overreaction and underreaction, and you make better decisions about what to investigate. Over time, these monitoring habits turn AI security from a vague fear into a practical discipline, where you can say what you saw, why it matters, and what you did about it.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.